Hello everyone, Ron again, and in today's video we're going to talk about timbre. That's spelled Timbre. In case you want to do further research, it's not, well, we don't pronounce it the way that it is spelled. It's like the word right, R-I-G-H-T. It's not pronounced anything like what it looks like. So this is one of those. So when we think of timbre, we think of the character of a sound, its tone, and essentially the quality that differentiates it from other sounds. As a simple example, you would never mistake a piano for a violin, right? Especially if the violin was playing the legato note, which means one that's sustained. So you know that a piano could never play the way a violin would, in that it can't sustain, and it also is more of a transient. Like it could have a sustained pedal so it lasts a bit longer, but it's not like a violin in that the note could continue forever as long as the person continues to hit the string with the bow. So what I'm going to do in this video is going to be simple. I have a mini synth, but it's set to default. I didn't do anything to it. All I'm going to do is just show you different examples of timbre, and then that's it. This is going to be another simple video, but as this relates to achieving clarity, you achieve clarity this way because your ears are able to differentiate between different timbres of different instruments. Similarly, you would never mistake somebody's voice for a violin either, right? Even if like the violin was playing a low note and they were singing the same note, you would still be able to perceive that there are two sounds. So that's the idea behind this. In previous videos, such as the ADSR videos, we looked at pluck sounds, but now I'm going to look at some sounds that sustain and just tweak them so you can see examples of different timbres and consider different forms of music where you say, well, maybe I would use this timbre in that song, or I would use it in this section. And we'll also consider, why, because different timbres fit different occasions. So let's get into it. The first timbre we're going to talk about is the timbre of just a regular saw wave. Now, obviously, you're not likely to hear one of these just placed casually in a song everywhere because it's buzzy. And also, the vague words that we use to describe different sounds are also related to their timbre. So, buzzy is a way of describing the character of a synth. Bright could also be, because if you look at the harmonics, there are a lot of upper harmonics. If you look at my voice while I'm speaking, there's more energy down here than up here. So let's change the waveform of this mini synth and make it so that it is two saw waves and see how the timbre is affected. If you were to ask me, I would say it's still very buzzy, but it is bright. So that's nice. It will stand out in the mix because it's bright. It has a lot of upper harmonics. But let's see what happens if I was to switch this to a Supersaw, right? And change the modifier. Now that's not the best sounding sound. Usually when I think of a Supersaw, when I consider the modifier detunes it, by the way. The idea is having multiple voices, similar to the chorus effect. That's what a supersaw is. It's a bunch of saw waves. So the modifier detunes the saw waves from each other, and they remain combined together. But I think of it kind of like a beehive when it sounds like this. That just reminds me of the sound that a bee makes. So you might say the supersaw timbre is buzzy, but to me, it sounds like a bee, so I would describe it that way. But the point in showing this is that you wouldn't mistake it for either of the first two. It is buzzy, but it's very distinct. So now let's go back to saw plus saw. Leave that around 50 because that's where it usually sounds good. Increase the attack time, increase the release time. And let's see what happens now. This sound, if affected slightly, would sound sort of regal to me. Now keep in mind, all of them are buzzy, but you wouldn't describe them the same way. Especially if you added reverb to this sound, it could be a sound that sounds very elegant. You could change the sound so it could actually be a very nice sound by maybe attenuating the buzziness in this case. Let's look at some effects. Start off with delay. And let's see how the sound changes when I add delay and bring the mix level down some. Listen for the sound when it initially begins, and you'll notice that because of the delay feedback, it has a bit of a tail now. Can you hear how the delay adds a bit of character? It changes the way the initial sound sounds. At least as we would perceive it. Because they're not playing directly at the same time. But we're not necessarily going to hear the individual differences because we're going to perceive it as one sound. But you would notice, at least it sounds to me, like it does get a little bit brighter. So now, think of all of these buzzy sounds, and let's see how the timbre of this sound changes if I lower the filter. So here we go. Get rid of the pop. By increasing the attack time, the filter is opening right here, and it takes a bit longer to open. Consider that. That might be the sound of the sun coming up over the horizon versus this. And you'll notice that as I have lowered the filter cutoff point, the sound is a lot more gentle. So this sound. Even let's say, if I modulated the filter in the same way. It's not going to do anything because it's already open. However, so these are two different timbres you might use in two different occasions. If you want your song to sound beautiful and elegant and gentle and relaxed, you might use this idea where the filter is opening up, a low pass filter. But if you want your song to sound harsh, it makes more sense to have more higher harmonics, whether you have delay or not. So let's look at the same thing with distortion. So the filter is completely open. And now when I add distortion to this sound, let's see what it does. See how it becomes more aggressive? And if I were to add this type of distortion, the decimator, that's Bitcrushing. So it makes it sound like it's on an older device, like it's 8-bit or 16-bit. Think of a video game, like an older handheld one like a Game Boy. If you do too much of that, it will sound crazy. But my point is that each of these timbres will be perceived differently. Like the original regular saw wave we had, you would never mistake it for this. Because that sounds crazy. Real crazy. Now, let's think about adding reverb. So, reverb is turned on. Back to the filter. Actually, turn this off. Back to the filter. Now, regular oscillator. The double saw wave with modifier around 50. With reverb, let's see. Sounds like something from the 80s to me. With the filter cutoff point dropped, that's with a much higher note. So in context, if I was to have a regular sound, like this one, you wouldn't mistake that sound for something that was like a piano or a pluck sound. So therefore, if you put the two of them together, they would be distinguishable from each other. They wouldn't necessarily blend, because if they blend, that would be a form of constructive interference, where they would start to sound like one sound, which is awesome when you do it. It's a technique called layering. That'll be for another video. And it sounds really good. In fact, I use layering to make the sound that is in the opening song that plays at the beginning of the video. It's made of a bunch of different synthesizers, and one of them has a phaser on it, and the other ones are doing different things. And they're playing notes that are in the same area of the spectrum, so they sound like one big sound. And so they sound very clear for that reason. They don't interfere with each other in a way that's negative. One of them is not masking the other. They're building each other up, if you will. Now here's another idea. If you look at this default, this is routed to the master track and it's routed to the reverb buses. Steel Hills is still there. Haha, I updated the project. Now, what happens if this sound is 100% wet and reverb? That's going to have a different timbre too. So let's listen to what that sounds like. Using the various techniques, I'm going to just do them all, lowering the filter, double saw wave, and adding distortion. So check it out. And this is only reverb. So you can see with low pass in it, it gets lower. So actually, overdrive in this case is good for adding upper harmonics. So check this out. So those sounds sound mysterious to me, or like a sort of ethereal quality. If you were walking into somewhere like Atlantis and you feel like maybe it's inviting, that's the type of sound I would expect. Especially. Now let's decimate it and see what that sounds like. So by combining a few things that we have talked about in previous videos, like reverb and ADSR and saturation and distortion, and even bit crushing, which I never talked about, but it's a form of distortion. We have created a sound that we could apply to maybe some different things, because in this case, even though the sound is bit crushed, the sound added to reverb makes it sound better. I could think of things that I would use that for. If I was doing something cinematic, that might describe something in a place like Atlantis. Say, if I had already represented Atlantis with ethereal sounds, I would take the same reverb that made it sound ethereal and place it on some sound like this and maybe represent sandpaper or sand or something that's rough, maybe rocks or a vase, a granite vase or a vase made of some hard material, you know, like an ancient clay pot, maybe something that you would expect to be dug up when this place is discovered later by archaeologists. And it just has a rougher texture like the sound, but probably something that's made of metal and has jewels in it. That's what comes to mind for me, like a golden vase that has like rubies and sapphires. And I would describe something like that, maybe with some decimation, or well, bit crushing. It's called decimator, but bit crushing. I might describe a sound like that, maybe broken glass or glass shards that make up a stainless window. So there's a lot of numbers of things that you can do with timbres, both for creative effects and of course for the fact that if you made a sound like this and you made it low in the mix and let it sit back because it has a lot of reverb on it, it still would be distinguishable from a sound that's like a pluck or a piano. So that is how timbre relates to clarity and also sound design, because you'll be able to distinguish sounds that have different timbres from one another without too much trouble, as long as they're not very similar. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you got something out of this. If there's any more questions, leave them in the comments. Like and subscribe and all that. And as usual, have an awesome day. Peace.